Welcome to episode 1 of the Triple Option Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Breferi. So we're just going to dive right into it today. It's Tuesday. It's exciting. It's week 2 of the college football playoff ranking. Week 3 of the college football playoff rankings. The country got a little shaked up this past weekend. LSU struggled a bit, but they still won big. Ohio State won big over Rutgers, as expected. Clemson won big over Wake Forest. Georgia struggled in Auburn, but they made it out alive. It was a good game over there. Bama, probably the biggest story of the weekend. Tough loss, losing Tua Tagovailoa for the year. And Oregon cruised. So let's get into it. So LSU, it's weird because they're such a good team, and they put up so many points against Alabama and Ole Miss this past weekend. But their defense is kind of a cause for concern at this late in the season. They've allowed 78 points in the last 2 games. Their defense is ranked 47th in the country, and the biggest stat that just jumped out at me is they gave up 614 yards to Ole Miss. I mean, I looked at the stats. Ole Miss has a good offense this year. They put up points. But they struggled. They put up 10 points against Memphis. They put up, I believe, 17 against Texas A&M. You know, they're not an elite offense. I believe they're ranked 28th in the country in total offense. Ole Miss, that is. Over 400 rushing yards to Ole Miss. I mean, they got to figure that out down the stretch because they have A&M to close out the season. They don't have a very tough schedule, but in a couple weeks, it's coming up. They're playing Georgia in the SEC championship game. That's no joke. Georgia has a great defense. Their offense struggles, but they can put up points. Georgia can put up a fight against LSU. I'm not saying it's time to hit the panic button, but just know Georgia's going to come firing out of the gates. And LSU, you're not going to be able to win the national championship with just your offense. You got to make big defensive plays. Against Alabama, they made some big defensive plays. I mean, they got a little lucky on the first drive when Tua fumbled at the 8-yard line, but they forced turnovers against Tua and the Bama offense. But if they want to make a serious championship run, they got to step the defense up a little bit. Even if they cruise in the first round of playoffs, once they get to that national championship, whether it's Clemson, Ohio State, possibly Oregon, whoever it is, you got to be able to stop them. You got to make turnovers. They've given up the 6th most touchdowns in the country. So they're tied for 6th. Their offense is so amazing though that it not only keeps them in games, it helps them win big. But they got to figure it out. I think Coach O will get the boys together around the troops. I do expect them to fix it going into the postseason and later on in this season. But I keep mentioning their offense, and who's at the forefront of that? Former Ohio State quarterback Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow has been lighting the country. He started, week 2? Started week 2 in Texas Memorial Stadium. He's just been slinging the rock, and most people, if you listen to radios or watch TV, whatever you do, most people will credit Joe Brady coming over from the Saints. And it's hard not to. I mean, LSU is known for a pro-style, running the ball down your throat offense. And now they're spreading them out. They have wonderful receivers, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. That they can really throw the ball downfield now. And even Clyde Edwards-Helaire. If you need, they can balance it. If, say, it's 2nd and 3rd, 3rd and 3, something like that, they can still run the ball. And they'll get 7 to 10 yards on you. They're a tough offense. I mean, Joe Burrow is 2nd in the country in passing with 3,600 passing yards. He only has 6 picks, and he's 2nd in touchdown with 38 behind Anthony Gordon at Wazoo. So he's 38-6 on the year. LSU, I think they still deserve the 1 spot. The rankings come out tonight. I think LSU is going to stay at that 1 spot. Just because if the committee is going to put them there after beating Alabama, I mean, I understand they struggled. at Ole Miss. I mean, not even struggle. I mean, Ole Miss, they were up big and they always kept the lead, but Ole Miss was chugging back. And like I said before, like my biggest concern is that Ole Miss put up a bunch of yards in their defense. They still won big. You know, they played a good game. So I think you kind of have to leave them at one. You know, if they won in Tuscaloosa, they've beaten Auburn. Sorry, they've beaten Auburn, Texas, Alabama now, Florida. They've beaten really good teams. They're proven. You got to leave them at that one spot. Ohio State I think they have to be too, but Clemson could jump them. Clemson really could jump them because my thing with Clemson this year is that people wanted to see them lose, and once they struggled against North Carolina, it's almost like people thought they should be in the bottom 25. But since then, they've been blowing teams out. Yes, they beat North Carolina by 1 point. Since then, they've beaten teams by at least 3 scores. And they just showed against Wake Forest this past weekend. Wake Forest was a top 25 team at one point this season, and they made them look like they haven't even won a game this year. But with Ohio State, they have 2 huge games. It's going to be their biggest test this year so far. We thought Wisconsin was going to be their biggest test, but the week before that, Wisconsin lost to Illinois, and then they dropped in the rankings, and they weren't the same. But Ohio State, they're playing Penn State this weekend. Penn State's only loss came to Minnesota, and that game was a nail-biter. Penn State is not a bad team. But Ohio State gets Chase Young back this week. That is huge for the defense. That's a big move for the defense because Chase Young has made a huge impact on this defense this year. His first 2 years, I knew he was a very good player. I didn't think he could be as dominant as he's been this season. I think with Penn State and Michigan coming up in these next 2 weeks, having Chase Young to really solidify that defense. J.K. Dobbins, the running back, had a great quote. Somebody in the media asked him, you've pretty much, I'm not going to go verbatim, but they pretty much said, so you've only played in the first half of most of these games this season. How does it feel? Are you ready to play in a full game this week versus Penn State? J.K. Dobbins pretty much said, who says this has to be a full game for me? Why can't I just play one half? Meaning the Buckeyes are so good this year that they dominated an amazing defense such as Wisconsin's. Who's to say that they can't do the same thing against Penn State? Although this game means a lot for Penn State, I've had the feeling all week that Ohio State is just going to come out of the gates and just barrel through Penn State. Anything's possible, but it's just one of those things. I have a gut feeling Ohio State is just going to blow the hinges off Penn State and Michigan these next 2 weeks. They lead the nation in total defense. Their offense leads the nation in touchdowns with 69 touchdowns. They've given up the least amount of yards per game this season, but they only have 2 ranked wins. That's why when you compare them with LSU, yes, Ohio State's been dominant, LSU's been dominant. Ohio State looks a little better on defense, but they only have 2 ranked wins. Cincinnati and Indiana, they're competitive teams, but at the time, not ranked. They've only ranked teams so far. They've only beaten Wisconsin and Michigan State, and Wisconsin was more of a competition until the second half. Really, Michigan State kind of stayed in the game, but they haven't had a team come and hit them in the mouth, and that could be dangerous going into the postseason unless they're that good of a team, like Clemson last year. Clemson never really got smacked in the mouth last year. I mean, Notre Dame kept it kind of close for a little bit in the first round of the playoffs, but in the national championship, it was close for a bit, and then. But hey, Clemson's rolling. In the last 6 games, listen to this. Last 6 games, they've outscored opponents 315 to 58. So Clemson is in that conversation for top team in the country. But the problem is Ohio State and LSU above them, they're also extremely good teams. I can't see Clemson jumping to number 2 or number 1 because Ohio State played Rutgers this past weekend. Obviously, they blew them out. It's hard to look bad against Rutgers, and no offense, but yeah, 315-58. So that tells you they're putting up a ton of points on offense. They're not having problems moving the ball, and they have stout defense. Two things you need to be the top team in the country, they have them. They have the third-ranked offense behind LSU, and they have one more game. It's against South Carolina. South Carolina could maybe keep it close. Last year was a shootout. South Carolina has shown they could beat a top 10 team this year when they went into Athens and beat Georgia. I just think Clemson has too much of an upper edge on this rivalry. They're too good of a team. I think they're just going to cruise past South Carolina. And then the ACC championship, they're either going to play Virginia, Virginia Tech, or Pitt. Can those teams stop them? They can play them tough. They can play them close maybe, but I see Clemson going undefeated into the playoffs. I see 3 teams going undefeated into the playoffs for that matter. LSU, Ohio State, and Clemson. Let's get to Georgia, though, at the 4th spot. Georgia's not talked about that much either. After their loss for South Carolina, people thought they didn't. I thought they didn't have much of an identity. But I can tell you this: they have a ball player in Jake Fromm. I really, really, really like Jake Fromm. I think in the NFL, he has those intangibles. He looks the part. When he drops back, he looks like an NFL quarterback. He can sling the rock. He can manage a game. There's going to be games where he only throws for 100 and something yards, but he'll keep his team in the game. He can control a game, and they have the formula to go to the to go to the playoffs rather. Win out, beat LSU in the SEC championship, and you're in. I think if they lose one game, if they slip up at all, if they lose to LSU, even if it's by 1 point and it's one of the greatest games you've ever seen, I don't know if the committee is going to let a 2-loss Georgia team slide in. If Utah or Oregon wins out, I said this before. Oregon's only loss came to Auburn in week 1. Since then they have not lost a game. Georgia lost a game in the middle of the season, and if they lose to LSU, they're going to lose a game at the end of the season. I can't see the committee putting them in, even if they play LSU really close. But Georgia against Auburn, that was a good game. That was an electrifying game. Jordan Hare was rocking. I enjoyed every second of that game. Brian Harion's another guy. I've known about him for a while, but he showed a lot. He showed a lot of toughness in that game. He wanted the ball. You could tell he wanted the ball in his hands. And Georgia's defense stepped up late in the game. I know Bo Nix had that questionable toss on that 4th down play, but they stepped up. But at 5, I think Bama. I think Alabama's done. It hurts to say. It doesn't really hurt, but it sucks to say, I guess. They've been in the playoff every year. Unless Mac Jones can just absolutely light up Auburn, I don't know. They're not going to be a conference champion. And the committee has not seen much out of Mac Jones. I think they're done. It's tough because of the of the skill players they have. Guys like Najee Harris, Devontae Smith, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs. They have ball players. I think it's a different Alabama team if Dylan Moses never goes down at the beginning of the season. He was a really good player, but I think they're done. I don't know how much the committee is how much slack they're gonna give them. And then at 6, so Oregon keeps winning. They're making it hard for the committee to keep them out. I feel like most people don't want to see Auburn in the playoffs. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but they have a quote-unquote a quality loss, a top 25 Auburn team early in the season. Although as a freshman quarterback, it's still Auburn. It's a big-time SEC team at a neutral site. But, excuse me, Oregon looks impressive. They look good. They're putting up points. And then Oklahoma. So Oklahoma is really an interesting team this season. Uh, After their loss, they made a huge statement win, huge comeback win versus Baylor. Or no, they lost. I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago. Last week with Iowa State, that on the 2 point conversion, that was a close game, but they won. That's the biggest thing you have to do is win. If you keep winning, the committee almost can't keep you out because you're winning. You're winning ball games, and Oklahoma found a way to win. They were down 28-3, and I looked at my friend and I made a bet with him. I said, I guarantee you by the end of this game, Oklahoma will make this a one-possession game. I made the same bet with a different friend at halftime of LSU and Alabama when it was 33-13. I said Oklahoma will make this a one-possession game. Once they got down to one possession, my friend was upset. I was like, all right, double or nothing. Guarantee you Oklahoma wins this game. I could just see something in Jalen Hurts in that offense. Baylor was bringing pressure. Baylor was bringing a lot of pressure. He made Jalen Hurts make quick decisions, and most of the time they were the right decision. That was an outstanding game out of Oklahoma. That was a tough environment. That was a really, really tough environment. That stadium was packed and it was loud. But Jalen Hurts, man, he had a great game. And then Minnesota kind of shot themselves in the foot at Iowa. I understand, like I said with Baylor, Iowa's a tough place to play. But it's tough. They controlled their own destiny. Now, I think even if they keep winning, the committee controls their destiny. If win out, go to the conference championship. If they lose to Ohio State, they're done. I don't care if they beat them by 1 point on a last second Hail Mary. I think they're done as a 2-loss team. I can't imagine a 2-loss Big Ten team getting into the playoffs. But with tonight's selections, if I had to guess, I would go LSU 1. It's tough with Ohio State and Clemson. I believe Ohio State will get 2, Clemson 3. At the 4 spot, that's really up for grabs. I could see Oklahoma jumping into maybe the 5 spot. That 4 spot, though, Oregon's at 6. They can maybe jump from 6 to 4. I don't know what the committee is going to do with Alabama. I have no idea because they still won big at Mississippi State. They're a 1-loss team, and they've gotten into the playoffs as a 1-loss non-conference champion. But they did that having Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts. So I don't know. But I think these next couple weeks are really, really. I think something's going to get shaken up. I most excited, not only because I'm an Ohio State fan, but I try to be objective. I'm most excited to see what Ohio State can do because they're playing real good competition now. They've played good competition throughout the season. They're playing some really good competition now. The game with Michigan, that's in Ann Arbor. It's going to be 100,000+ people. And Michigan wants a win. So I think they're going to play Ohio State really tough. We're going to get to see what Justin Fields is all about, see how he plays under pressure. But even with Penn State, I think Penn State's going to bring the dogs at them, but I still see Ohio State winning that game big. But I think the most exciting story this season, though, has definitely been LSU. Definitely the rise of LSU's offense, showing how dynamic they can be. If just looking at their offense in the past, they put up 0 points against Alabama last year. It was, I believe, 29-0. They put up 0 points. This year they go into Tuscaloosa, put up 46 points. That's just a turnaround and a half. I love the energy Coach O has. He really fires up his team. They're just a fun team to watch. I believe they have a tough schedule, tough season, tough schedule, and whoever has been thrown their way, they've won. That's the biggest thing you can do in college football right now, this late in the season. You just have to win. Doesn't matter if it's ugly, doesn't matter if it's pretty. Just win your games. That's at the very least. If you play an ugly game, win the game. Georgia went up 21-0 against Auburn in Jordan-Hare. They were up 21-0. Auburn got a touchdown. And it was like, okay, 21-7. Georgia can just get another touchdown, go up 28-7. Auburn gets another touchdown. It's 21-7. You start biting your fingers a little bit. Both teams didn't look great, but Georgia got the win. But college football is so exciting this time of year. It's really, this is why I like college football much more than I do the NFL. It's just exciting because you're excited for the rankings, and then there's just the big rivalry games. The crowds are packed. It's loud. It's a lot of tension. For the most part, you see good offense being played. You'll see big defensive plays, but consistently good offense for the most part. Right now, the top four with LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, and Georgia, some powerful offenses right there. I mean, Georgia hasn't been as dominant on the offensive side of the ball, I'm sure, as they'd like to be. But nonetheless, I mean, even 5 and 6 with Bama and Oregon, these are high-powered offenses, and they're sprinkled in there are very good defenses too. So, listen, I'm excited to see how the rest of the season shakes out. I'm excited to see what the playoff committee does tonight with their rankings, specifically like the top 8. I'd love to see what they're going to do with the top 8, mainly what they're going to do with Georgia, Alabama, Oregon. I don't know if they're going to take Georgia out of the top 4. They beat Auburn. It's not like they lost the game. They didn't look great, but they won the game. So do you take a team out of the top 4 for winning just because another team won their game by more points? All right. I don't know what they're going to do, but it's really exciting. And we're going to talk about it next week. We're going to break it down on episode 2. I thank you guys for sticking with me today. My very first podcast. This is the Triple Option Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Breferi. Thanks for joining us.